All right, guys, it's Tuesday night at 7 o'clock Central. It is time for conversations with Commodores. I bet most of you guys recognize this bearded gentleman, number 51, coming out of Gallatin High School, Daryl Holt. Good evening, Daryl. Thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the invite.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And Daryl, I had the pleasure of being on Daryl's team for 2 seasons. He was a couple years ahead of me, and I have just always admired the way Daryl conducted himself as a teammate, as a Vanderbilt Commodore, not only as a player, as an alum, as a fan before he even got there. There's just so many things that if you guys don't know Daryl, didn't have the pleasure of being one of his teammates, it's not too late. You need to become one of his friends. You need to connect with Daryl. But Daryl played 83 to 87 for coaches Mack and Brown, and was a captain in the 87 team. And Daryl, coming out of Gallatin High School, let's talk about Gallatin and how, for those who don't know geographically, how close is your hometown to the campus?
We're about from downtown Gallatin, about 35 miles to the Vanderbilt campus. It's gotten a lot closer now. Gallatin's actually grown, and I'm on the edge on the west side of town, and I'm about 25 miles from campus now.
Oh, wow. So that could be a 25-minute drive or a 2-hour drive, depending on the time of the day.
Exactly. If you go on a weekend, it's not a problem. During the weekday, it's a little more of an issue.
Yeah. And guys, in the 80s, Gallatin High School was a hotbed for Vanderbilt football player recruits. Arnez Perry, John Short, Jeff Holt, Goo Baby, Carl Woods, Daryl Holt, all within like a 5-year, 4-year, no, like a 3-year period.
3-year period, including, and Arnez Perry was in that recruiting, and that also. There was 5 of us.
Boy, that I don't know if in the history of Gallatin it's ever been like that for one school, much less around the mid-state of Tennessee. That many talented athletes making their way to the Vanderbilt campus, and I bet that was pretty cool for your coach at the time.
Yeah, and coach was Calvin Short, was John Short's dad.
Yeah,
and my junior year, I used my junior year. Maybe my junior year was a good example. We had 6 players that signed SEC scholarships that played when I was a junior. We had Carl Woods that went to Vanderbilt, obviously. Guy Neal went to Kentucky. Vernon Bass went to Tennessee. Jeff, Arnez, John, and I all went to Vanderbilt. And then 1 year behind that was Thomas D. Woods, who was Carl's little brother, who ended up going to UT. So we had quite a little run right there with athletes, not only in SEC schools, but other schools around.
And for those of you who don't know John, in his former life, he's now currently, and for many years, was an SEC official, a football referee on the weekends. And I'm going to try to track down John and get him on the show. But Daryl, we got all kind of love for you already. Of course, your bride, Shannon, is with us. Gary Clark, Keystone Cop, Billy Smith, OJ Fleming. Oh, here we go. Coach Shep. He says he's always got a good comment or two here, Daryl. He remembers a story about the first time that Coach Hopkins and he went to Chevy's and saw this good-looking young man and figured he played football at some college. 4 days later, Watson Brown introduced the staff to the team, and guess who it was there? Clearly, by your chuckle, Daryl, you remember this.
Oh, yeah, I've heard the story. And the funny part is Coach Shepard, he and his wife have a restaurant in Clarksville, Tennessee. And about 5 years ago, I have a son-in-law in Clarksville, and I went up there to eat dinner. So I talked to his wife, and she calls Coach Shepard. He shows up, comes to dinner. And he made me some type of dessert, and it was a chocolate burrito. And, of course, like I need a chocolate burrito. It was one of the best desserts you've ever had.
Wow. Well, I'm still aiming, Daryl. I want to get as many guys as we can for a Vandy Boys baseball weekend to head up there this spring and go have a big time. And hopefully Linda will let Coach off for a few minutes to socialize with us while we're there. He calls it the chocolate chimichanga.
It's unbelievable.
Well, Daryl, before you even stepped foot on campus as a signed scholarship athlete, you knew this campus and this team and this school probably as well as anybody. You had an older brother, Jeff, who I want you to share a little bit about. But when did your fandom, when did Vanderbilt come on your radar as a kid?
My family moved to Tennessee when I was in the 3rd grade, and Vanderbilt I didn't know anything about Vanderbilt, but my next door neighbors that lived across the street, and they owned a furniture company here in town, Crescent Furniture Company. And they were big Vanderbilt supporters, and they had basketball tickets and football tickets, but they would give my dad occasionally, they would give us basketball tickets, and we would go down and watch Vanderbilt play basketball. And for those of you that didn't live around here, back in the mid to early 70s, Vanderbilt basketball was on TV at night on Channel 2. They had a replay at 10:30. So that's when I became a Vanderbilt fan. And the basketball player that turned me the most was in the late 70s. His name was Mike Rhodes, and he was from Perry County. And that's when I became a Vanderbilt fan, was before I even thought I'd get a football scholarship. I love Vanderbilt basketball.
That's awesome. I love where the fandom comes into. But then you get into high school and you're starting to develop and show some real athleticism. But your brother Jeff kind of plowed the row a little bit there. So share a little bit about Jeff's athleticism and his story, his athletic journey.
Well, Jeff was kind of the puny one in the family, and he kind of followed whatever I did. Now, Jeff obviously was a year ahead of me, quarterback, defensive back in high school, and he was recruited pretty heavily. And I'll tell this story, don't mind. Jeff originally wanted to commit to Tennessee. My mom would not let him. My mom absolutely hated Johnny Majors.
Oh, boy.
And, oh, yeah, he was in our house. And I'll never forget the story. The night that Jackie Sherrill got offered a contract at Texas A&M. Biggest contract in the history of college football coaching. And Johnny Majors was watching TV in my living room, and he said, now remember these guys coached together for 15 years.
Yeah.
And he said, that guy's not worth the money. And it made my mom so mad that he could talk about his one of the players. And my mom and Jeff fought overnight for all night long about him committing to Tennessee. She would not let him commit to Tennessee. So he committed to Vanderbilt, which whether he'd have gone somewhere else or not, I probably would have still gone to Tennessee. But Jeff committed. Obviously, Coach Mack was there. Watson had come there, and Watson recruited us. And a lot of changes were happening at Vanderbilt at the time. But Jeff was 1 year ahead of me, and he obviously, played 4 years there. Many people know Jeff. He's a strength coach for 2 years as a graduate assistant. He didn't redshirt, but Jeff still lives in Hendersonville. And he has for probably 30 years now. He's owned his own gym. He has a personal training gym. Imagine Jeff in the fitness business, but that's what he does.
It's what you just. I want to welcome number 8, TP. Tony Piercy has just joined us, former teammate of ours.
Yeah.
Daryl, one of the things that you just mentioned about how Coach Major's comment really turned your mom off of Jeff going there, and probably for you too, if that was going to be a potential option. I can't tell you how many guys we've had on this show that the impression that mama or daddy gets from the coach's visit is so powerful one way or the other. It's that first impression that really sets the tone.
There's no doubt. And let's face it, every one of us wishes our college careers, the win-loss records would have been better. We all do that. But I'll say this, and I told this to Elijah Lipscomb. What's Lipscomb's first name, the wide receiver 2 years ago?
Yep.
Elijah. I told this to his dad. His dad was talking to me before a game and trying to decide whether he's going to come back for a senior year or not. And I told him this. I said, whether your son makes it in the NFL or not, there's one thing that I can guarantee you. If he goes to Vanderbilt and does what he's supposed to do, he will be a quality person and he will be successful in life. And there's a lot of truth to that. And I'm not saying other programs you can't do the same thing, but the coaches, the things in Vanderbilt, the parents, it's a different situation than most schools.
Yeah. It's and I've always felt that not only from the size of the school being much smaller than most of these state schools that we're competing against in sports, but from an academic standpoint, the Vanderbilt name, when you're a graduate, it just carries so much, not just in the South, but really anywhere that you go. It really does.
It does. And when you play athletics at a school like Vanderbilt, it changes even more because it's not easy.
Yeah.
Now, it's different than when we were there. It's easier in some ways probably now, but harder in other ways. It's a different ball game. But, you know, we were isolated more. Yeah. Now that I think they've kind of gone in and they do some things different, and they're a little more on the campus situation as far as living and so forth. I mean, we had our little dorm and our little area, but it is different, and it's not easy. I don't care. Everybody says Peabody. Peabody wasn't easy. I don't care what anybody says. Peabody's a great school, part of Vanderbilt, but there's nothing easy about Vanderbilt. And if you did what you were supposed to do in Vanderbilt and participate in athletics, you know how to work and you know what it takes to be successful.
How important was that to your mom from an academic standpoint of Vanderbilt versus any other school recruiting, Jeff, for you to come play football for?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, you know, your mom, of course, she's always going to be the one that once you go to the place where she thinks you're going to be the best person and have the best situation. And of course, Coach McIntyre, you know, he was an easy sell for parents. Coach Brown was an easy sell for parents. So I had Coach Mack recruiting me as a head coach originally, and then Coach Brown as the offensive coordinator. So the parents loved them, but it makes a huge difference. And of course, my dad was also, you know, he was highly involved and felt like academics were important too. So I think that the parents, they never tried to influence us, but they also tried to stress what was important.
Did you have any second doubts, Daryl, when you were being recruited that maybe you'd end up somewhere else? Jeff is already on campus, but were there other schools that really interest you and you had considered before deciding Vanderbilt?
The one that pushed the hardest and almost got me to change my mind was Kentucky. I had a guy, Neil, was a friend of Jeff and I's that went to Kentucky, and Kentucky was very close. I loved it. The coach that recruited me in Kentucky was Coach Nord, and I think he's still coaching. But Kentucky was a situation that was a little different, and that was one place. But it would have taken a lot to get me to change and of course, you're an attorney now, but when I was a little kid, I wanted to be an attorney. And about 2 weeks at Vanderbilt, I realized I couldn't make it. But that's one of the reasons I wanted. Not only did I love Vanderbilt athletics, but my goal early in life, I wanted to be an attorney.
The fall of '83, you stepped foot on campus now as a student athlete. Did you have a roommate that first semester?
I did. Paul Smilgas.
Smugs, coming out of the Chicago area. Smugs was in the quarterback room with me for a couple of years. What a good dude. What a good dude.
It's interesting because, and you may know him, but there's a guy here in town. My mind's going, but Dwayne Alexander is a coach at Tennessee Tech, and his brother Dennis was a year behind us at Vanderbilt, and he was an engineer, and he was in classes with I think Tony Piercy, Everett Crawford, Smilgas, and I didn't know Dennis, but I play golf with him now. And he was a year behind us in school. He was an engineering major here. So it's interesting on the things that you see. But Smilgas and I, and we still talk. He comes down when he can, when he's able to. But Paul and I were roommates for our freshman year and half of our sophomore year.
We got quarterback, we got lineman, we got north, we got south. Could you be any more different of two guys rooming together?
No, you had an engineering major and beer drinker. So it was, and we got along fine most of the time, but it was totally opposite. But it was so interesting because, you know, Paul came from East Chicago, Indiana. I'll never forget. We walked into the room, my mom and dad are with me, and Paul's mom and dad had already dropped him off and left. And he's sitting on the end of the bed by himself, just like we all would have been. And going, what has just happened to me? But Paul was a great roommate, great guy, had some bad luck in some things at school, but he was a great roommate, and I still consider him a great friend.
Well, speaking of great friends, we got Dwayne Jones is there with us. We got Steve Olinger. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm talking, of course, with number 51, Daryl Holt, one of the pride of the Gallatin Green Wave, and recently inducted into their Sports Hall of Fame. And I know that was a cool night for you. I saw some awesome pictures. I know you're proud of that accomplishment.
Yeah, it was a good honor. You know, Gallatin, we've had a rich history, struggled lately, but Gallatin still supports its high school, and it was a great honor, and I got to see a lot of people I hadn't seen in a long time, so it was awesome.
I bet it rang back some memories you probably hadn't been in your memory bank in a while.
That's true.
And were at least half the stories told about you true that night?
No, no. A lot of stories about me get exaggerated.
Well, one that's not exaggerated, you're going to have to fess up, because guys, I don't know if you realize this, but amongst athletes, when there's downtime, if you're not sleeping or doing stuff you shouldn't be doing, there's a lot of talk, just a lot of guys having fun, messing with each other. But that also comes during card games and playing different games of spades or hearts or whatever the game of the time was. They can be almost as heated and as competitive as on the field or in any other sports endeavor. And I'm going to get to my questions for you in a minute, Daryl, but I want you to talk about how important were spades? How fun was it for you back in the day?
It's kind of funny because Chuck DeGroot and I teamed up in spades, and we played Jesse Cofield, and what was the other guy's name from Ohio? He was defensive back. I never remember his name.
I'm drawing.
He and Jesse were big buddies. But Kermit Sykes and Joe Gentry.
Arnold Elliott, maybe?
Arnold was there. And then, but Kermit Sykes and Joe Gentry did everything they could to beat Chuck and I in spades, and they couldn't do it. They accused us of cheating. They accused that. And I can honestly say Chuck and I never cheated. But Chuck and I didn't get beat very often. And it's so funny because Joe Gentry, he's as competitive as a person you've ever met.
Yeah.
And he would want to fight us when we beat him in spades, but he couldn't beat us. And Joe, if you're watching this or anybody tells Joe, he still can't beat us.
Awesome. Keith Boykin. TP said it was Keith Boykin.
Keith Boykin, yep.
Now, there was always a rumor, statute of limitations is long gone, but this is going to be recorded and put up on YouTube. There was always the rumor that Chuck and Daryl would wear their glasses and be able to read each other's cards through the eyeglass reflections.
I honestly can say Chuck and I never cheated. But Chuck and I, to this day, I don't see Chuck. I see him about once or twice a year. But to this day, Chuck and I can sit down and have a beer, and it's like we've never been apart for an hour.
And that leads me to the most important topic of tonight, teammates, and the importance of teammates, not just during the 4 or 5 years and 6 years for some on campus, but for the next 40 years. Daryl, how important are teammates to you?
You know, and that's where and we've talked a little bit about this, but the biggest thing is, and again, we would all love to say that, hey, we won 10 games, we won 11 games, we won the SEC championship, we went to the bowl game. I would love, there's a lot of things I'd give up to turn that around. But the one thing that we have and that I have and that I would never trade for the world is friendships. We had a group of guys during homecoming. We got together with our wives, Eric Snyder, Dave Worm, John Gromos. We did some things together. Some of us went and got hotel rooms in Nashville and spent the weekend down there. Chuck DeGroot came in with his wife. Guys that all played together, and we still talk to each other and get along. Brent Turner came to the ball game. He wasn't able to make the dinner afterwards. But things like that, that as you get a little older, they become more important. When you get out of college, you're trying to get your career going, you get a family going, you may not come to the games. I'm lucky enough that I live 25 miles away. I can go to any game I want to go to. But a lot of people don't get to. So you kind of distance yourself or you get away from Vanderbilt. And I will say that Vanderbilt needs to do some things, and we can talk about this another thing, to bring people back. We need to bring people back because win, lose, or draw, we're teammates and alumni, and we need to be a part of the program. But the friendships that you make, I mean, the guys that were older, you know, the Bill Fletchers, the Jim Drawleys. I saw Jim Drawley this year. Jim Drawley was 2 or 3 years ahead of me. Saw him at a game. Hadn't seen Jim since the day he left Vanderbilt. He lives in Bowling Green, 60 miles away from me. His wife is a huge Vanderbilt baseball fan. She drives to every baseball game, including the World Series, by herself while Jim works.
Wow.
Okay. But
Wow.
that's the type thing, you know, Jim's 60 miles away from me and I don't know it. You know, you got other guys that you see, you know, there's guys that I haven't seen. I hadn't seen Dave Logie in 30 years. You mentioned Steve Oldinger. Steve and I were friends and on the same hall. Hadn't seen him but once since I got out of school. You know, Ken Brokaw, Will Wolford, Steve Wade, guys like that. You have relationships with these people and you may or may not see them, but it's hard for us to go back and find those relationships. But those relationships mean a lot because we went through a lot together, from 2 days to going to school, struggling in school. I mean, how many people came to Vanderbilt the first semester and were like going, what the hell have I got myself into?
Just about everybody.
I mean, my first semester, I mean, I've been better off staying at home and just coming in the spring. I mean, I'm not gonna lie about it, but it's those things that develop. You know, I talk about another one, Henry Beelan. Remember Henry? Henry and I had to go against each other every day during the toilet bowls. You know, people are like, what are the toilet bowls? When I was a freshman and a sophomore, my first 2 years, on Monday nights, the guys that didn't play on Saturday scrimmaged. Might have been a half line scrimmage or whatever. But Henry and I, for whatever reason, Coach Stanley would make me go against Henry every time. And Henry and I would fight and claw and whatever. And Henry was a walk-on. And Henry ended up playing some and had been very successful. He's a bishop in New York City now. But it's people like Henry that you remember too. You know, Henry was, you know, a walk-on. You got Gary Gerson, who's a walk-on. Guys like that were part of the program that you can't forget about. And so you can go on and on and on, but the relationships, and I can tell, you know, everybody, the relationships of the people that you played with, short-term, long-term, as a teammate, you don't forget them.
Now, when you guys have those reunion dinners with all the guys you just mentioned, how much of actual truths are spit at those dinners versus what you think were the truths back in the day?
Well, one subject always comes up, and I'm not going to mention it because there's some things that don't need to be talked about.
That's
I don't know you're an attorney. What's the statute of limitations on certain things? I don't need to talk about it, but you know, it's kind of funny because there are some things that are probably the truth stretched a little bit, but you know, a lot of it is more of, you know, hey, when we did this, and we would have done that, or this happened. It's not so much storytelling as it is event telling.
That's right.
That makes sense.
That's right, because it takes you back to that time and place when you felt invincible and you were there with these same guys. And then it's 30 years later.
Absolutely. I mean, we got some, I mean, what's the lake out there in the lake out in Belmead?
Percy?
No, it's out in Belmead. It's one that you're not supposed to fish at. And I got about 4 or 5 friends that fish there 2 or 3 times a month.
All right, Dwayne, Dwayne's watching. He'll tell me. He'll tell us.
I can't think of the name of it, but it's out there. It's a state park out there in Belmead, and you're not supposed to fish there. But I mean, I had guys that, and you know them too, they would drop their buddies off and they'd go fish and go pick them up an hour later. But there's things like that we don't need to talk about.
Daryl, we got Kenny Cole. We got John Denardi. We got Ed Parrish. All have joined. Dwayne says it's Radnor Lake.
Radnor Lake, that's it.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm supposed to ask you two guys we've lost, but were true teammates back in the day, Spike and Burr Seaver.
Mm-hmm.
Dino wants me to ask you about those two fellas and what you remember about Spike and Burr.
Let's start with Burr. Burr was from Hendersonville, and I knew Burr from that. But Burr and I were roommates on the road when he was talking about leaving. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot of time with Burr and spent a lot of time trying to keep Burr from leaving. And I even drove in the middle of the season. I drove to Cookville to have dinner with Burr's mom and dad and Burr to try and keep Burr leaving Vanderbilt. And
Wow.
a good friend of mine to this day, graduated from high school, Burr, Troy Tao is his name. And Troy came to Vanderbilt a lot to visit Burr, and Troy and I to this day still see each other. I do business with him and stuff. But Burr had a tough situation, and some bad things happened. And when Burr passed away, I was not totally surprised about it. But Burr had a lot of athletic ability, and he could be mean when he wanted to be. And Burr had a chance to be a really good football player. But Burr was a big loss, and because Burr had a big heart, but he was a competitor, but he just struggled with some things. And then Spike is another one. When Spike passed away, Brent Turner and I met, and we rode up to Sparta to go see Spike's parents because Spike's mom and dad came to every game like my mom and dad did.
Yeah.
And Spike's dad, win or lose, Spike's dad would come up and talk to you after the game, and just a great person. And I remember when we first got out of school, John Shorten, I remember, was at Gallatin Country Club, and Spike had been in that motorcycle accident, and he had the problem with his leg. Well, Spike comes out to play golf with John, and he's got a sleeve on his leg and can't move his leg, and he was in bad shape, and you could tell he was in a lot of pain. And Spike and I talked quite a bit and all that. And then when Spike passed away, we went up to visit his mother, and she said that the amount of pain that he was in was really bad. It wasn't just football, but it was a motorcycle accident. He had a really bad motorcycle accident. Yeah. But one of the things I always remember about his mom, Spike was a big fisherman. And that's one of the things that he asked for was his ashes to be placed in his favorite fishing hole. And she did that.
Oh, wow.
But those two guys right there, especially Spike, I'll never forget Spike because I always made fun of Spike. Say, Spike, stay off my knees. Get off my knees and quit cutting me out. But Spike's one of those that he was going to fight you till the end. And you like that. But that's two guys. And there's another one that you were a little younger and didn't remember, Paul Lamonto. Paul came with us as a freshman. And when Paul passed away, it was I'll never forget it. There was four of us that went to the hospital, and we got to spend about a minute with him before he passed away. And there was four guys there in the hallway, and I guarantee you there was more tears shed.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still think about Paul regularly.
And for those of you who didn't know or don't know of Paul's story, Paul was number 73. And the year after he passed, Coach Brown decided to do a tribute to Paul. That's why we wore number 73 on our helmets for that year. And I've posted some photos. You'll see them from either the 87 or 88 seasons. I can't remember which year it was, but that's why there's number 73. Paul passed, I believe, from either leukemia or a blood-related
Hodgkin's
cancer.
And the interesting thing about the 73 is my senior year, I played in the blue-gray game. And Jim Blondell, which a lot of people remember Jim came here as a freshman. He left. He played at Illinois. But when we were at the blue-gray game, Jim was the nose guard for the North, and of course I played center. But he remembered Paul because Paul was a freshman with us. So that was a great situation there. Chris Gaines was with us, and Everett and Carl. Actually, Carl wasn't. Carl was there the year before. But Blondell remembered Paul.
Well, Daryl, you remember what happened, and I brought this up when Chris was on my show. You remember what happened when they announced Chris as the MVP of the defense for the South, don't you? When he held up the trophy?
I don't remember.
The whole trophy crumbled in his hands. It was a very tall trophy. I still haven't found Chris. I'm going to find the photos. They're buried in a box. But the whole trophy fell apart, and he's just holding like the base or one portion of the trophy. That's how strong a man he was.
That's his grip strength.
That's right. That's exactly right. Dwayne asked, do you remember Paul's car that he roller painted?
Yes. Yeah, and it was rough, but yes, and he drove that car with pride.
Daryl, what was it about playing football, whether it was junior high, high school, college, wherever, that was the most fun for you? What was it about the sport?
It's it's hard. It's kind of hard to put a finger on it, but and I played all sports growing up. I played baseball in high school. I played basketball in high school. And I played football. But we were talking about this the other day. I was talking to a friend of mine, and playing offensive line in football for most people is not a lot of fun. And I was not that I was a great athlete, but I was good enough to play high school basketball and high school baseball. But I was a big kid, so playing football, I was a lineman. I wasn't very fast, still not very fast, and never going to be fast. But so playing the line, I guess the best thing about it was taking the pride to do the best that you could, and you were working with 5 teammates. Not only you had your whole teammate, but offensive line had 5 guys, 10 guys, 15, however many it was, and you had to work together. And one of the things that I mentioned, but we were talking about offensive linemen in the NFL. There's not a whole lot of them that are outspoken, and most offensive linemen are pretty quiet, and they try to do their job, and they kind of fly under the radar. And that's kind of one of the things that for the most part, your success is with 5 other guys. It's never an individual success.
Talk about the mental aspect of playing center, because a lot of people who never played it or just casual fans, they're going to assume it's just strength. You're just snapping the ball and then you're just hitting the guy in front of you. But it's far from that. It's got to be as cerebral as it is physical at times.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, in the snapping the ball part of it, it becomes natural. But at the beginning, it's a whole nother step in the process, and you have to get used to that. And of course, now so much of it's shotgun, and it's a different ball game. But the whole, making sure that the defensive calls are out there, and you're kind of helping people out. So the center is a little more involved now, especially now with the defenses and things that happen. It's a different ball game than what we played in 30 years ago, obviously.
Well, I was going to say the centers of today may be having to pull all the way to the far side to pick up a blitzing outside linebacker. Right. You never know where they're going to be these days. But Daryl, who were your main line coaches your years at Vanderbilt?
My freshman year was Coach Stanley. And he was there, I think, 2 years, maybe 3. And then I had Coach Mantooth and Coach Bradley. And then my last year, and then Coach Warhop was involved with them also.
Sure. I want to talk about Coach Mantooth for just a minute. He still was told the funniest jokes of anybody on the coaching staff by far. And I'm not going to repeat his joke, but Coach Shepard alluded to it the other day, but he knew what he was doing as a coach. It was clear. What was it like playing for him?
It was kind of funny because, his favorite word was dub, but, Coach Mantooth, after he left the college ranks, came back and he coached at Gallatin for several years. He was offensive line coach here, and then he went back to his hometown. He was a principal, but playing for Coach Mantooth was good because he was always, every now and then he'd get pretty fired up, but he always had a pretty even temperament. And, if you messed up, he'd give you that look and he'd spit that chew in the back and drip it down his lip. But he would explain to you what was going on. Coach Bradley, and I need to tell you a good story about Coach Bradley. But Coach Bradley was a little more easygoing, and then of course Coach Stanley was rough. And in fact, Coach Stanley, when I was a freshman, Coach Stanley got me out of my dorm room one night about 11 o'clock and took me for a car ride. And he told me that if I didn't want to play football, that it's okay to quit. But if I wanted to play football, I needed to go spend a little time with Will Wolford and talk to him about it. And that was kind of interesting. It was kind of interesting because, he was playing mind games with me. But the best story of Coach Bradley, of course, he coached us forever. But I'll tell this story.
He's still coaching with his son, Rusty.
He is. But after he left Vanderbilt, he went to Tennessee. And Johnny Major's last ball game, he's on the sidelines. And I'm really big on not selling my tickets to Tennessee fans. And I sold some tickets to Tennessee fans and got some pretty good money for it. So I said, I'll make it up. So I get with Billy and the police officers, and I get on the sidelines. And I'm not exaggerating, I'm holding Johnny Major's headset cord. I got a Vanderbilt football hat on, And Coach Bradley's about 5 feet away from me, looking at me going, "What are you doing?" And I was on the sidelines for almost a quarter holding Johnny Major's headset.
I would
Coach Bradley kept looking at that.
I'd love to have seen a picture of that. That would have been fun.
If anybody could ever find Jim Thorpe, who was the photographer for the national banner, he has pictures of it, but I never was able to get any of them.
Oh, wow. Maybe we can track those down.
It was pretty interesting.
Speaking of UT, TP wants you to tell the story about old Smokey getting a little too close to you after a bad offensive series.
I'm going to be honest with you. I can't remember that one, but I'm sure that it wasn't very nice.
He said that Smokey got a little too close on the sidelines, and needless to say, their cheerleader never made that mistake again around number 51. I have no doubt at all. Guys, I'm talking with Daryl Holt. We're living through some good times and just talking about some origins and being on campus. Daryl, where did you like to hang out when you weren't playing spades with Chuck? When you weren't?
I was usually at the library trying to study. I spent countless hours. I probably spent 10 or 12 hours a week in the library. No, honestly, I was either at the West End Sandwich Shop or Jonesy's drinking beer.
And for those who didn't go to either of those places, they were, I don't know, how a couple of blocks from Carmichael Towers.
Well, West End Sandwich Shop was right across the street. Yeah. So it was an easy getaway. Jonesy's was behind Wendy's, where Wendy's is now. Right. So it wasn't that far of a walk. You just cut right up the alley.
You could see one from the other just about.
Right. And so, that was two popular hangouts.
Yeah. Do you remember Banditos?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, Chuck DeGroot and I worked at Banditos. We were bouncers there.
I was getting ready to say about half the team would make its way over there during the spring weekends.
Yep. It's interesting. Cecil Whaley, who was one of the owners of Banditos, he passed away about 2 years ago. But he was older and he worked for the weather service, and he was one of the owners. But Cecil was a huge Vanderbilt fan. He passed away about 2019.
Well, I know that he enjoyed having the ball players and other athletes from Vanderbilt coming over there. And guys, it couldn't have been any closer to the Carmichael Towers as any other establishment. Yeah. I mean, it was literally probably 50 feet across the street. You just get across West End. Daryl, let's talk about some games or just playing an SEC competition that you may remember. Do you have any recollections of maybe one of your first times you got on the field? Did the crowd ever bother you? Did the fact we were playing this team or that player, any of that ever register with you?
And even to this day, people talk about the crowd noise, and I know it helps and it's there. But, when you're focused and trying to play, the crowd noise, you kind of let it go. But I remember the first play I got to play was my sophomore year. I redshirted my freshman year. I got to go in against Alabama, and we were victory formation, whatever it was. And I got to run 2 plays, and that was my first 2 plays. We beat Alabama at Alabama. So that was that. But the thing you do remember, and like playing Auburn my senior year, Auburn had a nose guard by the name of Benji Rowland, who was pretty good. They had a defensive tackle named Tracy Rocker. They had a hit Tracy Rocker's brother.
Yeah.
And then you throw a defensive end out there by the name of Andre Bruce,
who was the number 1 draft pick by the Falcons.
Yeah. And then, and you go on and on and on. We're playing LSU, and they got, I think his last name was Harris, was a linebacker. Mm-hmm. They were playing Alabama, and Cornelius Bennett gets hurt. Mm-hmm. And this guy comes in, and it's his backup. It's a true freshman. And I can't think of his name now, but played for the Chiefs.
DT.
Yes.
Derek Thomas.
And Derek Thomas. And he comes in there, and he's better than Cornelius Bennett. Yeah. But I remember we're playing Virginia Tech my junior year. Mm-hmm. It was my junior year, maybe it was my sophomore year. It was my sophomore year. Brian Reams, who was a walk-on quarterback, you remember Brian. Mm-hmm. His best friend was a center for Virginia Tech. Mm-hmm. So we had worked all week on situations we were going to do. Bruce Smith is a defensive tackle, which, he's unbelievable. So we got all these formations. He's going to play over Wolford most of the time, so we're not really worried about it. We can handle that. Well, we get Lynn Amity calls a special meeting on Thursday. Brian Reams talked to his buddy on Wednesday night, and they're going to move Bruce Smith across the line in front of, depending on the formation, in front of different people.
Yeah.
So we're having a special offensive meeting to talk about that and all that. The last thing I want to see is Bruce Smith in front of me.
Yeah.
But that, it's players like that. I mean, there was a lot of players, that Auburn team, that defensive front with the Rockers and Benji Rowe and Andre Bruce. Of course, Alabama always had good ones, and there were so many of them that we played against.
And guys, this is just in the about 4-year span. In the 80s, he's mentioning Hall of Famers, all pros, all SEC's #1 draft picks. And this is just who Daryl's seeing on any given Saturday. And no other conference, I mean, you guys know, no other conference is anything like this. But it's incredible how on any Saturday, who you've got to line up against, the cream of the crop, the very best. And it pushed you athletically.
It's been that way. It's been that way for a long, long time. It just didn't happen when Nick Saban got to Alabama. It's been that way for a long time. I mean, you had, Georgia back in the 80s, Vince Dooley and his staff. I mean, they always had great defenses. And LSU, Ole Miss, even Ole Miss, when Billy Brewer was there. It's been, the SEC's had great players for a long time.
Daryl, what do you like about the current game? It would be too easy for me to say, what do you not like about the current game? What do you like about the current game that maybe we might have benefited from during our time?
Well, the thing I do like about the current game is there's a difference between pro football and college football as far as enthusiasm. You got the crowds, you got the students, you got that, and we need to win to get that back. But in the NFL, at the end of a quarter, the players take their helmets off and they walk to the other end. I'm not saying they're not great players. It's just a different thing. Yeah. And I like that still about the college game. The college game has the one thing I hope we don't forget about the college game is college football is a privilege, is not a right. Mm-hmm. And I think we're losing some of that. And that bothers me a little bit because, the college football is a good thing. And I'm afraid that there's too much TV and there's too much exposure. But I hope we don't forget what the college game is about, because the college game is about a group of guys coming together, playing together, and trying to win, not just for the school, but for themselves. Forget about what your uniform color is. It's those 85 guys that you practice with that you're winning for.
Each generation, heck, each year, players get bigger, faster, and stronger. From when we played in the 80s compared to the way they are now, everybody at every position is bigger, faster, and stronger. But from an offensive lineman standpoint, there are a lot of truths about your game in the 80s that still hold true today and will forever. If you don't have good feet, are you going to play much, Daryl? What's the importance of having a good base and good feet for a lineman?
Well, and it's always going to be that way. If you're off balance and don't have good feet, you're not going to be able to block the guys in front of you. You're not going to keep up with it. It's a different ball game now how they do it, but you got to have good feet and good techniques to keep your shoulders square, keep your feet moving. The strength situation is so much different than when we played. The diets. I mean, we had Miss P feeding us, and you went in there and ate as much as you could eat. There was no plan. Now everybody's got a plan of what they're supposed to eat. This is what you're supposed to eat. When I was a freshman, there was 4 of us. There's me and Eric Harmon, Dan McMahon, and I think Ken Brokaw. And Doc Crease would make Robbie, and I forget Robbie's last name, he would pick us up in the morning and drive us to St. Thomas Hospital. And we had to get back in time for lunch, for breakfast check, because they wanted us to lose weight. So I spent about 6 weeks. Every morning they picked me up and drove me out to St. Thomas Hospital to lose weight. They didn't change my diet.
Is St. Thomas down in Belmead?
Yeah.
And you had to run all the way back.
Yeah. And most of the other three caught a ride back, and I ran back every day. Oh yeah, the other three got picked up by a couple of guys most of the days. But and that's fine. But now they changed my diet too. Back then they didn't tell me not to eat this or don't eat that. They just you got to run some extra, lose some weight. Whereas now it's so scientific that if you need to put on weight, if you need to put on lean muscle, they try this or they do different things. So it's a different. The whole mentality is different.
Is it true that you still own and wear daily your grays that Kelly doesn't know that you took?
I got some pictures here in my office, and I'll show them to you in a minute that they probably don't know I took either. But the grays, how I fit into the grays, I don't know. My wife and I were cleaning the basement out a couple of weeks ago, and I had my gold Vanderbilt 51 sweatshirt. And she said, there's no way you ever wore that. Okay. But the Kelly grays are embarrassing. I mean, they were absolutely embarrassing. I mean, they were bad before spandex. And then we wore those things. And I mean, it was horrible. And the worst part about it is if you stole them, they acted like you did something bad. How much did they cost? 50 cents a piece, maybe $1 a piece?
Maybe less.
But we had and I love Bill Kelly. It wasn't his fault. But we had the worst socks and the worst shorts in the history of mankind.
And probably some other stuff as well. And Dwayne and Bill have told awesome stories about equipment, as has Luke on here. Guys, I'm talking with
all did a great job. Those three guys, and there's others, you couldn't ask for better people to take care of us. I mean, Luke and Bill and Dwayne, I mean, you couldn't ask for better people to do their jobs. They were awesome.
Hey, they didn't set the budgets. They just had to deal with
No, I agree. And Bill, if you made Bill mad, you got wet clothes for the afternoon practice.
That's right.
If you made him mad, it was not going to get dried.
Tony says that his favorite shoes he has ever worn are the miter shoes. Yeah. You remember those?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember the miter shoes. They were pretty sad. But yeah, the miter shoes were pretty bad.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys, I've got just a couple more minutes. We're talking, of course, with Daryl Holt. Daryl, how important has it been to you over the years, and how important is it now that Vanderbilt is your school, where you graduated, where you played, where you represented back in the day, and have all these years?
Well, again, we talked about it earlier, the relationships that I have with some of the former guys, and we still get together. That to me is something that can never be traded. But also the degree. I mean, I'm in a hot UT area. I mean, Gallatin, Tennessee, there's not a lot of Vanderbilt graduates here. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of Vanderbilt fans here. There was for a while, but not a lot of Vanderbilt fans here. They're mostly Tennessee fans. But and I got a lot of friends that are strong Tennessee fans. In fact, my attorney is the biggest. I mean, his email address starts with Smokey. Okay, in 2000, whatever year it was, in Dooley's last year, we went down together. He left me in Nashville with no ride. He left at halftime because Vanderbilt was beating him so bad. He left me with no ride home. But there's not many people or any people that I know of that don't respect what we did as Vanderbilt athletes. They know, I don't care what anybody says, what school you went to, what you did, getting a degree from Vanderbilt is not easy. It's not given. No. And you have to work to get it. And I think people respect that. And I think in my career, I've owned my own insurance agency now for 20 years. And I think that's helped me not only in what I need to do, I know what I need to do, but people respect what I went through or what I accomplished.
Absolutely. And speaking of respect, as I told you when we first started, I've always respected you as a teammate, as a captain, and just who you are. And I appreciate your evening with me tonight, talking and sharing a little bit of your story, Daryl. So thank you.
I appreciate the invite, and I'm glad I know about this, because this is a great thing, and we need somebody, and maybe you'll be the one to bring us together as former athletes and alumni, where we can experience together as we get older and remember what we went through and what it means to us.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I keep doing these each week, because these conversations, they mean the world to me. and they're very important to so many people. We're telling the oral history of the Vanderbilt football program. We go back, we've had players from the 50s all the way up to 2 years ago who've been on the show. And I think that's just such a cool thing to share our common experiences and just everybody continuing to anchor down. So thank you guys. Thank you, Daryl. We will see you guys again this time next week. Please continue to do what's right and be safe for you and your families. Keep contributing to our Facebook group, pictures of your playing days, your jersey, your helmet, whatever you want to share, please throw it in there because everybody loves to see that stuff. I don't know, Daryl, if you remember a walk-on, a writer for the Vanderbilt Hustler, Dan Morse, in the mid-'80s. Dan wrote a series of articles in 1986 about walking on and playing in the spring game. And I got the series. I have 6 of the 7 articles that we found them in archives from the Vanderbilt Hustler, and I'm sharing them every couple of days. The series, it's a fascinating read, and there's so many of our teammates mentioned in there and things that were going on during that time period. So please get in there and go take a look at those. But thank you again, Daryl. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You guys have a good night. We'll see you next week.